My name is Gary Pember. I worked for the Milwaukee Road from 1970 when I got out of the military, out of the Navy, and I started an apprenticeship there. My father had been there since 1948. He was a machinist, and that's a trade I took up. I worked there until 1980 when they shut the lights off, and then I finished my career with a Burlington, Northern Santa Fe, and Seattle.
What got you started, you said?
My dad had, like I said, had been a career railroader at Tacoma Roundhouse and a big shop there. And so when I got out of the military, I decided to go ahead and he got me an apprenticeship there. So I became an apprentice machinist there. And I loved the railroad very much. It was, I'd go back and do it over again. I'm retired now from the railroad after 26 years. And my dad used to come, I remember even before when I was little, my dad he'd work weekends sometimes, and he'd do road jobs. Sometimes he'd go up to Cedar Falls, work on one of the electrics or something. He'd stop by the house, he'd pick me up, and he'd take me with him. So I'd be up there with him. He'd have his helper with him, and I'd sit in the cab of the locomotive. He told me not to touch anything, not to do, and sometimes he'd go to Raymond down in south and to work on a GP9 or something, and he'd take me with him against railroad rules. But my dad, he was really interactive with me. He was a good dad, good role model, and so I loved the railroad. And the biggest, I worked on some of the electrics there when I did my apprenticeship, and after I got out of my apprenticeship, I shrunk tires on a few of them. They were like a steam locomotive tire; it had to be shrunk on over a rim, and I got to do some internal work on them. And in 1972, we brought the brand new ST40s in, -2 models, which was probably the best power the Milwaukee Road ever bought. So it was quite an experience.
What were some of the difficulties?
Difficulties were that sometimes toward the end getting parts. They shipped the big power out, and we were relying on the older General Electric locomotives, and they were pretty well worn out. They needed some work, and so getting parts sometimes to do the job. Trying to keep the power going, to make trains, to make time. We didn't want to. We knew that the financial situation of the railroad, that the railroad was in trouble. So everybody really did. We were able to fix a lot of things with a lot of less parts than it was when I went to the Burlington Northern, because they had a lot of stuff there, to work with. So we had a good crew, did a lot of hard work, and it's sad to see the railroad had to leave.
It was dangerous?
It was very dangerous. The railroad's always been real keyed on safety, though. It's a real hard push on safety to protect the employee. We did a lot of manual lifting in those days. We did have some cranes, and we used a come-along to change, like a power assembly. You're looking at a head of a diesel locomotive weighs 200 and some pounds. So you get a 200-pound head, 2 guys would lift it up there. The power assembly itself, with just a piston inside, you'd lift that up there. And so a lot of stuff was done by hand. Sometimes you worked alone, a lot of times you had a partner. It was hazardous. You just had to be, a lot of guys had injuries, here and there. My back over the time shows the wear and tear of 26 years on the railroad.
So you probably got pretty close with the team you worked with, right?
Oh yeah. We were a real close-knit family. Everybody got along with everybody. I don't ever remember a lot of drama going on. There's a lot of fun stories,
Like what?
Oh, we had a guy who one time we were on a diesel locomotive on their General Motors diesels are all 2-cycle engines, so they have what they call an airbox on each side. Either the turbocharger or the blowers blow air into the cylinders to provide combustion air. And we were cleaning. They have a drain that, because you have some bypass oil that collects in there and it needs to drain out. So they have a drain at the end on each side. Well, sometimes that drain would get carbon and get plugged, and we had to use like a long rotor and clean that out with a drill. It's actually a cable. Well, the guy I was working with, he had long hair, in the late early 70s, everybody had long hair. And he had his head in the airbox. He was going like this with the drill, and he caught his hair in the cable, and it wound up. He pulled his head right in there, and we ended up having to cut his hair to get his head off, his head out of there. And they after that, they made the guys with the long flocks wear nets, hair nets,
Do you guys make them keep the one side shorter than the other for a while?
Yeah, he didn't want to cut his hair. He kind of just pushed the other stuff forward. And I was never into the hippie hair movements, but.
He must have been pretty dedicated. Just leaving.
Yeah, it didn't look too bad. They did a pretty good job. It didn't feel good when he got pulled in there. Bob Hutchison. Yeah, Bob Hutchison. Both Bob and Ron both worked at Milwaukee Road. Ron was a machinist, so Bob was a helper to begin with, and then he became a machinist. So.
Do you ever have any memorable shipments? Something that sticks out in your mind as when you think back on your time there? There's one shipment that just pops in your head.
What do you mean by a shipment?
Or just a run or a.
Well, what I was reiterating earlier about it was in late '79, and the railroad had already filed bankruptcy, and we were trying to keep trains running. They got a call to the roundhouse, and they said, well, we got 200s called, it's sitting up at Tacoma Junction. And the engineer reports he doesn't have any cab heaters, the horn doesn't work, and they won't take the unit over Snoqualmie Pass without cab heaters. Well, the traveling engineer was Wayne Ferrier, and Wayne went in the office and told the master mechanic this is what's going on, so the foreman sent me and another roundhouse foreman up there to figure out what was wrong. Well, the unit just had come out of overhaul from Milwaukee, and they had painted it and everything, and when they had painted under the cab, somebody had disconnected the horn, and so it never got piped back up. They had a plug in it, so that was an easy fix, but the cab heater didn't work. The cab heaters back in the second or third unit worked, but Mr. Ferrier said, look, he says, you guys, we don't have time to switch. This power's late now. If you want to we want to keep this railroad running, you'll take this power over Snoqualmie Pass and not complain about the heaters. He says, you're not going to freeze up there. And it was like in April, So he just told it like it was, and it wasn't that Wayne was a heartless man, but the problem was the railroad was on its knees as it was, and he was trying to keep trains going, to keep this in running. So that's one memorable thing that stuck out in my mind. The inspector, inspected the power at the shop because power gets inspected before it goes out. They do a terminal air test, and they check the bell, whistle, and everything else to make sure that power is ready to go. And apparently he must have skipped that one part of the deal where they noticed that the horn didn't work. But anyhow, that was pretty memorable, yeah. So I always thought Wayne did a good job, and the engineer they didn't like it, but they took the power because they knew we needed to run trains. It wasn't like it was a safety issue. Yeah. So, yeah, Lawrence Wiley, he was one that integrated the M.E.A.L connector between, it's actually the large cable that goes between locomotives nowadays. You'll see them go by. It's a huge cable, 2.5 inches in diameter, and it has I believe a 16 or 28 pin connector on the end, and each one of those pins tells the locomotive behind it what the lead locomotive is doing. Well, he first started with the Little Joe Electrics in Deer Lodge, getting that set up so they could use them as helper power or lead unit power. So you've got electric with 5,000 horsepower, and it's able to coincide with the diesels. You don't have to put as many diesels on that train, and so yeah, it worked really good because they were able to use the electrics here at Snoqualmie Pass as helpers, the box cab helpers to help trains over the summit. You don't have to double the hill, Now and then later on, the railroad came up with Locotrol, which was a radio controlled, where the lead unit would have a radio receiver in it and a radio sending unit, and that would send a signal to a unit mid-train somewhere, and then that would be like a helper unit, be like an engineer in there. So they were kind of innovators of that here on the West Coast. And nowadays they call it distributed power, and which has become much more finesse, where you don't have to worry about slack. You can get longer trains because you don't have to worry about drawbar interaction where you're having train break-in-twos, because when it receives a signal nowadays, it automatically receives a signal the same time you do something up in the lead unit. There's no delay. There's no actual like a second or 2 second delay, which can be, if you're on a hill, that's bad, because then you get drawbar slack or whatever, you know. So it's pretty unique to the railroad. We used to have to change motor generator sets, and they were behind a where the engineer said there was an engineer and fireman. Then you had what we call the death chamber, and that was a series of electrical contactors that smelled like burnt electricity all the time. Behind that was what they call the motor generator set, and it had a big blower on it. That actually the motor generator set turned the blower that put cooling air into the traction motors to keep the motor heating down on the wheels. And changing those out was a real problem because they were about 9 feet long and very, very heavy. And when we did it in the back shop at Tacoma, so we would take the roof off. There was a patch over the roof would come off, and by the time you got that motor generator set above the cab of the locomotive, you had very little room. So it was always a real tricky situation, hard job to do. A lot of the parts didn't come apart easy, and you know, hard to find things that get broken on them. Built in 1916, you didn't have a whole lot of spare parts. So we cannibalized a lot of the older locos that were out in the boneyard for a lot of parts, you know. And the shop was able to return the commutators on the MG sets, and the electricians were able to clean the comm up so we could, you know, put them back in the locomotive and make repairs to them. They did about everything there. A lot of the guys didn't like the GEs because they leaked oil, the doors wouldn't stay shut. It's kind of ironic now that General Electric has come full swing, that now General Electric is a very formidable power source in the United States now compared to EMD. I enjoyed the EMDs because they're easy to work on, no special tools, just bang, 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 you know. Where General Electric the engine itself required a spreader to spread the crankcase when you pulled the main bearings down. They just were heavy and hard to work on. I could sit and tell you for hours. They're talking about an interpretive center where they have a locomotive shed. I think it's important to get a locomotive first. Then you have something to draw the people to see. And then we can get the electric locomotive. Then we can get a shed over it. And then this is going to be a big, big draw for this town, because when those two diesel locomotives, the two U-25s are gone, they're gone from history. They're not building them anymore, and you're not going to get them out of the boneyard. They're gone. When that electric locomotive, if we lose a chance of getting that ran here, E50. It's like a piece of history. I mean, you know, it's like comparing nowadays. You go down and you see a Duesenberg drive through town, and you think, wow, you'll never see one of those again. I mean, that's a Duesenberg. Well, they're not building Duesenbergs. They're not building anything like it. Who's going to want a Porsche, you know, from 1990? Who cares? But electric locomotive from 1916, that has a story. Each inch of that steel has a story to tell, because it involves so many people. In the same way with this General Electric diesel. I got a lot of skin on that locomotive. Yeah, knuckles. So we really need support from people, a philanthropist, anybody who can say, yeah, I want to save a part of history. Because it's important not only to our generation now, but future generations, that they know about it. This was once a transcontinental railroad. It's not just a trail. Thankfully it's been saved, but this was once a transcontinental railroad that was a vital, important link during World War II, the Korean War, and I'm sure that if we could have kept it going for a few more years, it would have been even vital, more traffic mainstay of traffic right now.
How did you feel when you found out that Milwaukee was closing?
I was heartbroken. It broke my dad's heart. My dad loved this railroad. You know, there was something about the Milwaukee Road. It was just different. You know, when I went to the Burlington Northern, I was a black sheep, like the NP guys that went over there, because they were all stuck on the 1922 Northern Pacific strike, and they blamed the NP guys for that. Well, the Milwaukee guys, we were the ones that were outcast too, because you know, we weren't part of this inner circle of Great Northern guys. But you know, it wasn't long before we proved it. Yeah, we could do the work, and I was heartbroken. I really was, because it was the only thing I knew. And my father had, you know, I remember him coming home when I was a kid, with his railroad hat on, you know, and if things could get fixed, my bicycle could go to the shop, it could get fixed. It was a family-oriented place. Yeah, I don't want to forget the memories. I've started writing them down. So I'm glad we were able to sit here and preserve some of the history for future generations.